Welcome to another spine-chilling edition of true stories that are guaranteed to make you second-guess the safety of the night. The world of night shift workers can be isolating and eerie, but sometimes, it's not just the loneliness that brings fear, it's the terrifying encounters they face when the world is asleep. But before we dive into these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Your support keeps the channel alive, and we'll keep bringing you more hair-raising stories to keep you up at night. Now, let's get started. As a security guard, I have been employed at this Detroit factory complex for roughly 6 months at this point. It's not the greatest work, but it's decently paid and retains the covered bills. I spend most of my time sitting, monitoring cameras to make sure no one's skulking in places they shouldn't be. Most nights are quiet, with just a collection of deserted buildings. My job has been working the night shift, 10 p.m. until 6 in the morning, ever since I began. Sleeping is difficult, but I get by. The factory is an old location, utilized to create auto parts from the past. The majority of it's now deserted, only a few buildings remain sprinting, and everything is dark at night, and the sound of rats running around. Occasionally, I begin my shift by looking at the doors, ensuring that they are secured tight, after which I take a seat in the office of security, drinking coffee and observing the live video feeds. Each pair hours I take a stroll, polish my flashlight into the shadowed areas, as well as to. It's boring, to be honest, but it's money. However, one evening, everything went awful. It was chilly. The type of Michigan cold that penetrates your bones. Additionally, I was on having my third cup of coffee. I'm exhausted, since I didn't get a good night's sleep the day before. Additionally, I was gazing at the displays when I observed something outside of camera 3 on the dock for backloading. It appeared to be a swift, cunning shadow moving, and I, squinting, he leaned closer, but it's too dark to tell. I recall reflecting at initially that it might not have been anything, but I noticed it scuttling across the feed, and I simply let out a sigh. I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight and left. At night, the factory is a labyrinth. Large old buildings connected by alleys. I cast my light around, making sure that dock for loading. No sign. The door was closed out of someone breaking in. After that, I went for a walk. Went to the fence and discovered it was still in place, without any holes. I assumed it might have been the wind littering the area, and I was going to leave, when I heard what sounded like a really quiet snicker. I paused, paying close attention, and then I was attacked by the shadows. They were all 4 or 5 in number, donning masks, such as for Halloween or that kind of thing. Additionally, they were younger. I could tell by their movements. Incredibly energetic and jittery, like children. Energized by sugar point, one of them gave me a forceful shove, and I staggered back, nearly letting my flashlight. Additionally, before I could even truly figure out what was going on, one of them punched me again in the gut, so forceful that it took the wind out of me. I gasped and doubled over, and then they were all kicking and hitting me like a herd of untamed creatures. I attempted to fight. Even aimed my flashlight at one of them. They were too quick, though. Someone seized it and threw it away prior to. I was punched in the face by another child, and my nose cracked, and I could sense the blood is beginning to flow. I can taste it in my nose. I yelled, but they continued to strike me, causing me to lose my balance, and my legs were kicked out by someone, and I went down hard, with pain piercing my. I hit the gravel with my hands and knees. However, They continued after that. Kicks came down on my arms, back, and ribs. I curled up, attempting to conceal my head, but it failed. Accomplish a lot of good. There was pain everywhere, and their loud laughter was audible to me. Insane, as if it were a game. It was disgusted by the way they relished it. They behaved like mean children. The type that removed flies' wings in order to observe their wriggling. And I was afraid of that. Greater than the discomfort, the manner in which they didn't take care. How they appeared to enjoy it. This continued for what seemed like hours, but it was impossible. And at last, I was struck by one of them in the head. And that's when everything actually happens. Went dark, and suddenly there was nothing, as if a switch was flipped by someone. And it was still dark when I awoke. And still chilly. I was lying on the ground. I buried my face in the gravel. My mouth was still and my head was pounding. It had a bloody taste. I made an effort to move, but my entire body yelled at me. I had the feeling that my ribs were burning, and I couldn't move my hands. Yes, and I spat out some blood. Fragments of my teeth. They had let me down. Awful. I had no idea how long I had been out. The children had left. No indication of them. My shoes and clothes were ripped. Were absent. They had to have taken them. The Air Jordan 𝗫𝗍𝗂𝗧 wallet was still in my hand when I felt for it. In my pocket. I suppose they had no desire for money. Merely intended to harm me. I stood up slowly and unsteadily, feeling lightheaded as hell, and each step was painful. However, leaning against the wall, he began returning to the office with a stumble. I held on to. My legs are weak, I'm tripping, and my ribs hurt with each breath. However, at last I arrived at the security office, collapsed, climbed into the chair and picked up the phone. I could feel my hands trembling so much that I rarely call 911. I muttered something concerning the attack, provided them with the address, after which I simply sat there. Trying not to faint again, I waited. The paramedics arrived rather rapidly. They loaded, and the lights were flashing. They requested that I get on a stretcher. What took place, but my jaw also hurt a lot. There was too much to actually discuss at that time. I was brought to the hospital, where I spent a few days there, covered in bandages. Doc claimed that my ribs were broken, fractures in my fingers, a concussion, and a swollen face. They even withdrew, provided me with some painkillers and some teeth, and claimed I was fortunate it wasn't worse. But I didn't feel particularly fortunate. However, the police arrived as I was sleeping. One older man, two of them, and one younger. They requested that I explain the assailants, but I had little to give. Their faces were hidden behind masks, and it was gloomy. I informed them of their youth. Swiftly, laughing uncontrollably, but that was it? They recorded it and stated they would investigate, but I doubt I never again heard from them. I suppose I knew those children would not be found. Detroit has far too many shadows to go inside and hide. And a few days later they allowed. I'm going home. I continued to feel pain, and I had little choice but to sit around. Definitely couldn't work. I had two dependent children, but I didn't understand how I was going to cover those expenses. My 8-year-old daughter sobbed when she saw me completely beaten. My 12-year-old son attempted to appear tough, but I knew he was trembled. I informed them of my workplace mishap and didn't want them to know the truth and be afraid. My sister came over with food to assist. She's a professional at changing my bandages. She knew what to do because she was a nurse. I hated having to rely on her in that way, but I couldn't do it by myself. leaving. Every day was a struggle in bed. My ribs hurt. Those didn't fit my hands well. Shattered fingers. And I felt like I was worthless. I couldn't even look after myself, let alone just my children. I couldn't stop thinking about repeatedly that evening. Why did they do that? It? For fun only? I never hurt no one, and I was merely performing my work. It was simply nonsensical. When their boss called, they said they were I'm sorry it occurred. Promised to add more security, possibly an additional guard, and it didn't significantly improve my mood. The other guards, upon my eventual return, gave me a shoulder clap and stated that they were relieved I was alright. However, I noticed the concern in their gaze. No one desired to believe they might be the next. The police never got those kids and most likely never will. And thinking about it makes me cry that they did not get caught. I'm stuck too with these wounds. It's simply not right. What can I do though? Life isn't fair, I suppose. And now I'm more cautious. Always scanning the area, anticipating trouble. And that might be a good thing. Keeps me alert. However, it also demonstrated to me how rapidly go bad and how it's not always possible to stop it. I simply continue for my children personally, and I suppose there aren't any other decision. In the 1980s, I grew up in Modesto and, to be honest, I fell in with a somewhat negative crowd. A few of my friends ended up in prison. A couple of them ended up in the ground as well. However, those who stated that enough is enough and that I truly admired, the ones who previously escaped, our way of life turned into an anchor around our necks. I made the decision to tidy up. Additionally, because I figured I was kind of into driving, that I would be hired by a taxi company so that I could maintain a decent standard of living while still traveling through the city I was familiar with and cherished. I was 24 years old in 1991 and had been taking fares in the Modesto area for nearly 2 years. Let me tell you, it was an extremely difficult job. And occasionally, I received a genuine character in my taxi's rear. Similar to, I spoke in a raspy voice this one time. I get flagged down by the little guy. Additionally, when I inquired about his story, and it was revealed that 𝗬𝗏𝗄𝗏 was one of the original members of the Angels of Hell. Why wasn't he, I asked, on his bicycle? And he gives me a death stare in the eye from behind me and remarks, because I've consumed 5 shots of. I'm too damned old to spend money on tequila. The night in jail, I had a great time laughing with the man, and he was also an excellent tipper. So give a shout. I suppose it's out to the Hell's Angels. However, not everyone was that cool or amusing. Actually, I grabbed 1 or 2 passengers who got me in my time getting into a lot of trouble. Additionally, this is among them. Thus, it was approximately August 2nd, 1991, 8:30 p.m. because the sun had just set down, and I was traveling along the road, heading toward downtown on the 108. Since it was Friday, I knew I would be in for a hectic evening, and I was just going to. When I noticed a girl standing, I took my turn, sticking her at the side of the road. Cars passing by get a thumbs up. My initial believed that now was not the time to be. I'm hitchhiking here because Fridays are. Every Saturday got a little wilder when the sun set. Thus I pulled. I honked my horn next to her, and afterward she approached my driver's side. I was unable to inquire as to where she was on her way before she spoke. Like, sorry, I don't have any money. Simply require a lift. And from the how unsteady her voice sounded, she had been crying, and it was obvious. Thus, instead of simply driving away like some. She should jump in, I told her, and I'd let her get away with it. Her reply is, "Really, my God? Oh, I'm so grateful. Much obliged." Additionally, it sounds as though she might burst into tears once more. Consequently, she gets into the back of my taxi and she informs me that she would like to visit the airport. After introducing myself, I ask what hers is. Then, as I drive, I begin to inquire about her well-being. And I'm aware that you're not, but I'm asking. The issue is that it's too direct. She claims to have recently ended things with her 3-year boyfriend, that she is on her way to the airport in order to catch a flight to Florida, where she was grandparents were alive. I apologized to her. I was, but I thought she would be shocked to realize how many young ladies adore her. I provided rides once a week or occasionally, even on a daily basis. This is a depressing reality of relationships that occasionally fail in life. And when they separate, someone typically pulls the traditional Hail Mary with elegance. I need to leave this goddamn place. And that's where yours really matters. She didn't laugh, but I didn't anticipate that she would either. Thus, following my foolish attempt at humor, I began to express my happiness. Should listen if she needed someone to converse with. She needed to gather herself just before she began to speak. And she also started slowly. Simply didn't. I suppose I don't know where to start. However, once she started moving forward, thus I got up, listened to her, and let her speak. Narrative. She relocated to California from the college on the East Coast, where I met her. Her junior year boyfriend then lived with him following her graduation and had to find somewhere to stay. She said, he had been ideal when they first met. Gentleman. He had been there for her emotionally during those last 2 years of university, followed by financial support for a. Additionally, following her graduation, she was seeking employment. He had always been good-hearted and understanding of her, but after time, as she continued to search for work, he began to transform. He received less and increasingly mean and less patient. There was never any fighting between them. Next, it eventually reached the point where they were 2 or 3 times a week they fight. She stated that the industry she wished to work in was fiercely competitive, and that during her sending out and working her butt off, making calls and sending resumes, she wasn't having any success. However, the longer that continued, the more irritated the boyfriend was getting. Additionally, over time, it turned into this enormous source of stress that she was making absolutely no contribution. She claimed to be searching for a waitress jobs and other things at the exact moment they had a major argument about their breakup. By that time, her boyfriend didn't show any interest. He said, began tossing as she packed her bags, a few of her belongings. Then things began to intensify, and the altercation came to an end aggressively before she fled the home with everything packed in her suitcase. My dad and my mom used to fight prior to him abandoning her. Thus, as soon as I was prepared when she said that final sentence, to return by car to her starting point and kick her ex in the ass before returning to the airport with her, I apologized to her for the way things turned out, then inquired as to whether she was okay if she required me to transport her to the medical facility first thing in the morning, or something similar. She denied that he had actually harmed her. I then inquired as to whether she wanted me to, so she could call the police. She stopped. Additionally, she gave me this the first time. Instantaneous, frantic. No. And the first red flag was that. That's it. What caused me to Believe that I may have actually. I miscalculated the circumstances. I informed her that if he had struck her or damaged any of her belongings, then it was crucial to inform the police of such things, so that it was at least documented. However, she demanded that I simply take her to the airport so she could depart and accompany her parents. Back then I recognized the urge, or at least I believed that I did. The poor girl simply left through a traumatic event. She didn't wish to stay and discuss a play-by-play with some bozos. She merely desired to escape it. However, as I mentioned, there was something concerning that. That did sound a bit too desperate. I inquired if she took any action, like struck him back, which is why she wasn't so intent on speaking with the police. However, I also quickly reassured her that the police would take into account anything. That's what she did in self-defense. Self-protection. They won't see each other, she began. That manner, but when I inquired as to why not, she yelled at me outright. She states, "Okay. Because they won't. Now, just take me to the airport, please. I'm pleading with you." She was initially icy and irate, but when she arrived at the "I'm begging. When you left," she resumed, sounding like, once more, a young girl who is afraid. I suppose that pulled at my heartstrings sufficiently for me to give in somewhat, but not completely. Enough for me to completely abandon it. I remained silent for a short while, gave her a moment to relax, and recommended, if her former partner had committed a hit, the best form of retaliation against her would be letting him stay in the cell overnight. Then she whispered, "That won't happen to occur." I failed to recognize it for what it was, so I took some further action. Like, "Will you actually allow this to? Do you like this piece of trash?" She said that with this heavy voice that made the hair stand up on them, tingling in the back of my neck. "He will not go to no longer do anything to anyone." Bingo. Violence had been the end of their fight. Everybody. Correct. But not with the girl's former partner kicking her in the face. It concluded with her doing something to him. And the manner in which she concluded regarding his lack of activity, it gave me the impression that she had done more than give him a slap or something. That I said something along the lines of, "Miss, if you committed a transgression, I must release you from the taxi, or you're using me as a prop. Whatever is happening." At the time, I wasn't sure if that was absolutely true. The time, although I had heard that it was sufficient for me, so I did stated. Additionally, I mentioned that if all she did was throw a lamp or something at him, that in order to prevent him from being near her, whatever, she would go to the airport with me. However, if she took another action, if she left him in some way bleeding and in need of a hospital, however, was a different matter. I heard her as I waited for her response. There's rustling in the rear. My eyes. I noticed her when I quickly glanced up at the rear view. Seconds before, she reached into her jacket. I heard a handgun click clearly. Having a weapon. 3 times in 2 years I have been robbed. Years by then, so I was aware that. Sounds sufficiently good to be aware that the girl, the innocent victim, was my initial thought of domestic violence, had just drawn a firearm on the rear seat of me. I recalled away the phrase, "Well there, miss, nothing needs to be done." "Ras," I said without realizing it, even making an effort to talk. Then that same tremulous, tearful sound brought a voice back to her as she spoke. "Please just drop me off at the airport. I don't wish to harm you in any way, so please don't force me. I simply want to leave here." I didn't ask her any more questions. I desired as well. Lord, I really wanted to, but I appreciated my life much more than I thought it was worth obtaining any additional responses. I assumed there might have been a guy out there, somewhere on the floor of his kitchen, having a bullet in his body and bleeding to death. Gut. Perhaps a jerk who assaulted his girlfriend did merit a little suffering. However, I disagree with the death penalty. More than anything, I was curious if there was a poor kid crawling, circling in a pool of his blood and poop, since I would definitely want someone to summon an ambulance for me if I had heard regarding it. I did manage to give someone a call. However, that was later, so I suppose I should proceed with the story. Thus, I simply drove without uttering a single word, since I was afraid, and I'm not hesitant to express it. This girl had everything but acknowledged that they had shot a man. Additionally, I had this unsettling suspicion that she might do it once more if it meant that you couldn't get to her parents, if there were any, that is, grandparents. Because if I were that person, I would be considering a location in traveling to Florida from South America. I transported her to the airport, uttering no words. Then, after we received near the small drop-off location, the girl instructed me to pull over and that she would continue to walk. I acted as she inquired, halted the vehicle in the darkness outside of the crowded area, entering and exiting vehicles. Then she requested that I switch off the engine and hand above my keys. I assumed she wasn't interested in to shoot me too far away from everyone, those individuals, so they can hear the shots fired. I initially stated, "I can't. I have to earn a living, so do that, miss," in a manner that made my blood feel as icy as ice in my veins. I believe she briefly revealed the true her to me. I kind of turned my head halfway as I said I didn't want to give my keys to her, and I was going to explain to her how I refused to speak to anyone when she inserted that gun's barrel directly into my face. Additionally, she inserted it into my face, not that she merely pointed it out at me. She actually pushed the muzzle into my temple. Skin was so hard that it hurt. After which he said, "Give me your keys." I still had some resistance left, a final plea for her kindness, and I attempted to explain to her that you can't just rob a man of his source of income. How can I provide for my children if I unable to operate my taxi? At the time, I had no children, but I've said almost anything to maintain a grasp of my keys, as I wasn't joking when I requested that they make a living. However, she didn't even allow me to. You can't go past it before she blew up over how I was prohibited from telling her anything. How men were all alike, believing they could dominate all women, and how this one would not allow that take place. Then she reiterated that I was supposed to provide her. I wouldn't be returning home without my keys. See my imaginary children that evening, or any night. Really, I'm not a moron. I was aware of the best course of action too. The next step was to shut the F. Get up and follow her instructions. Thus I gave over my keys and observed her ascending out of my taxi prior to her hauling her bag behind her, and then while she was walking, leaving in the direction of the terminal with that same. She had a "poor me" attitude when I first observed her. I waited until she disappeared, and then ran in the direction of the terminal, where after that, Pay-ones dialed 911, watching me from behind the entire time. I was aware that airport security might be present within the terminal. However, I was also aware of the girl wouldn't be overly thrilled to see me. I didn't want to take the chance of getting shot when I could have called the police instead. From outside the structure, I had no intention of leaving. The girl had. I was forced to sit outside after losing my keys, the terminal, and watch for law enforcement to arrive. However, when they did, the The girl had boarded the first flight. Wherever she traveled, including the Bahamas, having clearly disposed of that firearm. In some way. But not my car keys. I needed assistance right away. Just to get home in my taxi. Next, my taxi was essentially inactive until 𝗦𝗫_𝗶𝗶𝗵𝘁 could be shipped to the company. Them. But a man did that, and I had my life. Feel like something unique following. That insane in the back seat of my car. Music. Prior to this, I was the area manager for 𝗦𝗫. This is a small chain of late-night restaurants in Minnesota. Moreover, of all the odd events in my professional life, this was the most terrifying. The diner wasn't where I was the evening of the incident, but two of my workers were. It was a tiny area just away from the highway, open all day, and there are some woods, a field, and a quite desolate section of road. Jenny and both Mike and he had been there for years. It took place. However, following that evening they both resigned and kept it a secret from everyone but the police officers what had transpired. I only needed to. The security footage was the final piece. And some ambiguous police clues. And even now, years later, I continue to consider what I witnessed and what I will never understand. Out. I recall that it was one of those vicious, the type of winter evenings when the wind must have shook the dining room like it was attempting to enter for a bowl of a hot meal. Mike, our cook, was a reliable 40-year-old worker with a wife and 2 children. Children who were employed at night for the additional money. The waitress was Jenny, a 20-something single mother with a keen mind. Knife and excellent for managing crowds on her busiest evenings. They were trustworthy. The type of workers you could rely on, but who were also capable of managing themselves. However, something entered that night. The diner where nothing was possible. Ready them for. A phone call came in while I was sleeping at home. I was awakened as soon as they stated that it was. There were about 6 police officers. All of the espressos hit me at once, and as they explained, there had been in the diner incident and how they required entry to the office in order to could watch the security video. They didn't go into detail. They simply stated that it was awful and that Jenny and Mike were engaged. I struggled to get out of bed, and I had a knot in my stomach from being concerned. After that, I drove across the snow, with a lot of questions racing through my mind. Was there a robbery? 2 groups of inebriated clients who had initiated a fight? Or was it a more serious matter? When I arrived, I had an entire. Many theories have already been proposed. Out. However, what I observed on that tape was something far more detrimental than anything I had anticipated. When I got to the diner, a policeman was waiting for me in uniform. Then, I escorted him to a small rear office with a dusty VHS and an outdated, broken TV. Participant. He claimed that he had to take the tape with him as proof, but he additionally requested that we view it first, just so that he could better understand what had occurred. I replied, "Sure." I turned the tape to 2:30, as he requested. AM, and then I hit play and it came to life on the screen. Mike was in the front, and it was quiet, cleaning the counters in the kitchen, and Jenny is outside cleaning the tables. The faint illumination. The door then opened, and 2 men entered. Perhaps they were in their late 20s or early 30s, wearing faded, thick jackets and jeans, but it wasn't their coats, which made me uneasy. Their faces were the thing. One was covered in tattoos, the area around his neck that extended to his face, and the other had these hollow, icy eyes that appeared to be unblinking. At first, they appeared composed, as if they were merely 2 stragglers seeking a burger. At the stools they slid, Jenny took their order at the counter. After that, Mike cooked with his back to them. Jenny pulled out the plates. They continued to. Heads down, they ate to themselves. And speaking little, I held on to, wishing they would finish and go. Of course they didn't. Suddenly, the person with the face, the tattoo, reached inside his sweatshirt and tugged, bringing out a pistol. The other came next, sketching his own, prior to each of them aiming at Mike, and Jenny froze like a deer in mid-motion. In the headlights, Jenny's face went red and her eyes widened. Slack. She had her mouth hanging open like a. The scream was simply lodged in her throat. Mike's hands jerked up, shaking violently. That it was even visible to me in that awful video. The two men also didn't hurry. They brandished their weapons and gestured for Jenny and Mike will emerge from behind the countertop. They staggered ahead on. Jenny was gripping the edge with unsteady legs, briefly out of the counter before letting go. After that, the two men pushed them to the rear, the walk-in refrigerator, and I reasoned, before raiding, they would lock them inside the safe's register. However, instead, Mike and Jenny were forced inside. They followed them and dragged. Behind them, the heavy door closed. The closed door's camera remained there, and it remained closed for 5, 10, and 20 minutes. Continuous minutes, so I had to fast forward the tape several times, beginning and halting. However, the door remained closed as my thoughts began to race, posing queries such as, why enter? What the devil are they doing with them? Why was he in there? I imagined Mike and Jenny during that icy walk-in. 37 minutes is a long period of time to be stuck in a box with two armed strangers. You cannot get away. The more I observed, the more dreadful that feeling became. My brain began attempting to fill in the blanks. Perhaps they were menacing them with the firearms in their heads, forcing them to act in a way that unimaginable. I can't even mention them. The walk-in was large, but only by refrigerator norms. There was hardly any space for 4 individuals. Rows. Were they shivering and standing there, too afraid to do something different from what they were doing? Told? But I don't get any hints from the tape. At last, precisely 37 minutes following the walk-in door shut behind them. Once more, it opened, and the two men stepped out, totally at ease, as if they simply completed a restroom break. The person with his hoodie was pulled straight by a face tattoo, as the other looked around the room with those two vacant eyes of his, followed by. They walked through the diner again, without even looking at the safe that was back in. The cash register or office is filled with bills. They took nothing at all. Nothing, not even a burger or a dime. Heading nonchalantly for the door, as though they had taken the most typical occurrence in the world. After that, they crept out, got into a just out of frame is a dark car, and disappeared into the wintry evening. I sat, the policeman standing there beside me, and I recall my hands. The next story will be more interesting. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.